Thanks for clicking on the video. Like, subscribe, and share if you find this useful or interesting. Okay, today I want to talk about how to shape the nose. And I'm going to modify these curves in 3D so that there's curvature here. And we're going to run face first into the most horrible thing about NURBS. Today, I'm going to talk about NURBS Rule Zero for surface work. And basically, it's like watching a puppy die, but we have to do it. I didn't talk about it until now because no one ever listens to the rule, and I certainly didn't until they pay a certain price for trying to ignore it. So how does this work? What's this about? If you've ever heard about NURBS in any depth, one of the first things you'll hear about it is NURBS suck because you can't make triangles, and it is absolutely true. But the fact that you can't make triangles is based on a deeper rule, and that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm going to talk about today. So what do you mean you can't make triangles? There's a triangle here. Yeah, but it has a definite flaw in it. Remember, I keep saying this is a preview. We have a flaw here, but don't worry, I have a way to fix it. Well, even when I fix it, the way I fix it is by pulling the flaw into this little surface right here. And it looks pretty good, but there's still a flaw in here. And what you actually need to do before you export this solid and do other CAD with it is you need to replace this surface with a surface fill from the surface fill workbench. And at that point, the fundamental flaw disappears, and it is replaced by an approximation along the edges. So you trade a fundamental flaw for a specific misalignment along the edges, which is perfectly acceptable. Okay, so you cannot make triangles out of NURBS, and this is based on a deeper rule. What is that rule? I'm going to close this. I'm going to close that. Here is the fundamental rule of NURBS. The control polygons for the two curves that meet at a corner cannot be in a straight line. You cannot align these two to make these curves tangent. The grid will fall apart. How do we make these grids in the first place? We take these control polygons in a loop. We use the default 4x4 grid on them, and it creates this grid that has parallelogram. This is good, and this is a good and necessary first step. And sometimes we have to stick to this because we have external constraints on the way we're modeling to the next surface. But most of the time, if you're going to blend the edge, you can apply a flow grid, which is what you see here. And the flow grid really smooths out the curve. And then you chop it up and blend. Here's what you cannot do. You can't even align the layout in a straight line. These two edges here must remain distinct. We haven't even broken the fundamental rule here because these polygons are not aligned, but already this grid is garbage. See what it's doing right here? It's crossing over itself, it's folding. Even when I apply the flow grid, it kind of helps because it pulls out this horrible point that crosses over to this side. It's still really bad. You see, like I still have these lines all over each other. This is not a good surface, and when you subdivide it, even though technically you're kind of removing the flawed point, this is still really bad. And these pieces here have become contaminated. And when you use them to try to blend to something else over here, it still won't work. So you can't even do this. You cannot create a triangle layout because even if the polygons aren't aligned, the grid will still be garbage. When you actually break the rule, it completely falls apart. See here, I said, well, I'm just going to align these guys and then that'll help this area, right? No, it doesn't. The default grid 4.4 has a collapsed section right here. See these two lines? These two lines should look like this. They should be making a distinct quadrilateral, but they've completely collapsed. When I apply the flow grid, it looks like it's helping, but it can't. This should be a quadrilateral, and it is still a bad triangle. And once again, even though you can cut up this surface and technically you've removed the fatal toxic point, these two blends right here are contaminated, and when you try to blend this into a bigger thing, it won't work. Here's where this applies to what we're doing for the nose right now. If you can't align these two sketches to produce aligned polygons, which make an aligned grid, if you can't even do it at one point, you certainly can't do it at 2 points. See right here? I've tried to do it on both sides. I've tried to align the curve, which is going to be similar to my nose curve. I've tried to completely align it to the two edges. It doesn't work. Even though it looks okay right here, this corner and this corner are both completely toxic, and these grids here, these edge blend grids, they're just pieces of the original grid, but they represent what our edge grids or blend grids are going to be based on, is completely contaminated and will produce bad surfaces. Here I'm showing like, okay, I've brought it back from a triangle to a quadrilateral on the layout, but I still tried to align these two polygons to make this curve into one curve. It doesn't work. The default grid is completely collapsed, and when I use the flow grid, sure, it has managed to pull off this point here a little bit, but there's nothing it can do about the fact that these two lines are in a straight line, because that comes directly from the polygon. So this is no good. Now you can get awfully close to having things in a line, and it'll just get worse and worse. But you can distort it a lot. You can distort it a lot and still have it be fine. But when you model your layouts, you should always have distinct angles between your layout lines. And when you create your polygons, you cannot align the polygons because that defeats the purpose of having a quadrilateral on the layout. This rule here is just how everything works with NURBS. And so many things are NURBS, it's not even funny. Like subdivision surfaces are actually NURBS under the hood. They don't use the N part of the NURBS, and they don't use the R part of the NURBS. These are UBS. And you see here, this triangle right here is a fake triangle that works basically the same as the preview triangle we've created in Silk. It only looks like a triangle. There's still quadrilaterals inside, and this point in subdivision surfacing like Blender is considered a flaw, and it has to be managed very carefully. Silk does a similar thing, but instead of making a ton of little quadrilateral surfaces, it says, no, we're going to make big quadrilateral surfaces, but we still have to manage these points very carefully. All right, I don't want to go too long on this. In the next episode, we're going to model our nose, and when we model our nose, we're going to want to do this right here, but we're not allowed. We are not allowed to do this. Now, there's something that's really nice about working in 3D, is that this alignment only matters if it's true in all planes, if it's completely aligned in 3D. I mean, look right here. If I look at it in this plane, everything is aligned, but obviously it still works. So I could have something that looks like this as long as in 3D, this point is up. As long as in 3D, this point is up, and the layout isn't actually aligned in 3D, and the control polygons are not aligned in 3D, it's fine if it looks like this in one view. The fundamental thing is that it cannot be truly aligned in 3D. So you could have something that looks like all of these. As long as this point is lifted up one way or another, and there is something that breaks the alignment, you'll be fine. So even if I see this from the top, as long as I can turn it around and see this turn back into a quadrangle and not a triangle and not a line, we'll be okay. And that's what we need to keep in mind when we're working on the nose. Now, it's perfectly normal to completely ignore this rule and think that you're going to beat it one way or another. And as a matter of fact, all of Silk is me dedicated to beating that rule. but you have to work with the rule to beat it. It's just really tough to accept. But that's what NURBS surfaces are. And this is not very important. There's no magical surface underneath NURBS, and you get these points and these grids as an interface. This is not an interface choice. The grid is the surface. The surface is directly generated from these points in a very direct way. So if these points are all aligned, if you do not provide some type of quadrangle at every corner, you simply do not have a surface. It boils down to a line, and a line cannot create a surface. All right, next time we're going to model our nose. See you then.